class we have discussed about this community management, and I was telling about the relevance of local community in the process of decentralization and the process of resource management. So now we'll discuss about the forest governance, and prior to discussing about the forest governance, so we'll discuss about that there are some basic concepts which we use very frequently in the context of forest governance, in the context of forest management. So those basic concepts we'll discuss first, then we'll discuss about the history of forest governance in India. See, the main thrust, which we'll discuss a little later, of defining the concept of forest, and also and in course of time, the British started classifying the forest into different terminology. What the main intention to get all the forest products and to carry these forest products and also mostly the timbers to their one country. That was the main thrust. Anyhow, so all of you might have heard there are different terminology used in the context of forest governance. One is protected forest, then you might have heard the reserve forest, then you must have heard the national park, wildlife sanctuary, then biosphere, then sometimes we tell elephant sanctuary, bird sanctuary, sometimes we tell tiger reserve. All these very small concept we use, but all these concepts are very confusing sometimes, because we don't know what exactly the reserve forest is, what exactly the national park is. So all this terminology makes us sometimes very confused. So for which it is high time to know all this basic concept in a very clear mode, so that it will help us in understanding the forest management and also the forest governance. And also whenever we get engaged in the in our professional life, when we will deal with the development sectors, we can understand exactly what are the basic lacunas happening in this forest governance. And because forest is a very big domain, and there are lots of researches going on relating to forest governance and forest management. And see, we have separate ministry called Ministry of Environment and Forest, and most of the time, whenever we go for setting of any industry, we used to have a lots of controversies coming up regarding this forest encroachment, and then forest loss because of this industrial development, then environmental loss and all these things. See, what is exactly the protected forest? What is exactly the protected forest? You see, the protected forest are those forests generally in which the human intervention is not prohibited, but hunting and poaching of animals is against the law. See, if you look into the protected forest, in protected forest, the human intervention is allowed unless and until it is prohibited. So means a human beings can get into a protected forest, because generally there are some forest which is not forest, reserve forest, like that. It is general forest, and sometimes what happens, in order to make it the conservation more stringent, the government used to declare some forest as a protected forest. And once they declared it is a protected forest, what exactly happened there? So there they they do the things in such a way that this kind of stringent regulation has to be imposed for a strict regulation and controlling of the forest. That is the main thrust and main funda. So for which they define first a general forest to a protected forest. Once they declared it as a protected forest, only the hunting and poaching of animals is completely prohibited, and all these activities, if happen, it is against the law. But if you look into the human intervention, it is not prohibited. Means human intervention is allowed unless and until it is prohibited. So that means a human beings can get into the, because suppose there are lots of people who are residing inside the forest, side by the forest, very adjacent to the forest. So the government never uh, restricted their movement to the forest. Rather, government told them you are eligible to get into the forest, collect whatever the forest product you are collecting under the law. So unless and until they are prohibited. But at the same time, if you look into, okay, this protected forest also to look into. These are basically classified into two types. One is demarcated protected forest, and another is undemarcated protected forest. So it is dependent the kind of means what and what modalities the forest department is classifying, and limits of the forest areas also. Because you see, when this forest is spreading over in a very huge acres of land, sometimes what happens, the government is to declare some area as a protected forest, even within a one forest. So then the other part of the forest is considered undemarcated forest, because that is not classified, that is not defined as a demarcated that protected forest. Because what exactly happens, so depending on the gravity, depending on the where the more animals are residing within the forest, based on that they have some calculation, based on that they do that. So then another very basic concept also arises, because you see, first it is completely on class, completely in general forest. Then in order to make the conservation little stringent, we defined this, immediately we declared one forest X as a protected forest. Then in order to make it more stringent, we next time we declared those that forest itself also from protected forest we declared it a reserve forest. And the moment we declared it as a reserve forest, then what happened? The we make the things very uh, so we make the things in a very kind of prominent way, through that the human activities are completely restricted. So you see, a reserve forest is a forest where the species are protected in their natural habitat in a more safety way, and the human interference uh, is not allowed unless and until it's permitted. See, it is just opposite to the protected forest. In protected forest, the human activities are allowed unless and until it is prohibited. But in the reserve forest, the human activities are not allowed unless and until it is permitted. Got my point? It is very clear. Protected forest, human activities are allowed unless and until prohibited. Just opposite is reserve forest. Human activities are not allowed unless and until it is permitted. But in both the cases, the poaching and hunting of animals are strictly prohibited. Get my point? So you see, even in the reserve forest, this hunting, grazing of animals are also strictly prohibited. And sometimes what happens, uh, the forest department gives some permission also to the local communities regarding the grazing and hunting of small animals, because there are some tribal communities who are mostly by profession they are hunting and gatherers. So mostly they depends upon small huntings and collecting the forest product and survives. Who are hunting gatherers communities like Chenchus in Andhra Pradesh, Tiger Reserve areas. So what am exactly telling? Sometimes the forest department used to permit them for hunting and grazing of animals in their forest, but to sustain their livelihood actually. So means only the entire forest is not open for them. Generally, they open some partial forest areas they used to allow to these communities. They can get into this forest and collect some of the forest-based products, and also went for a kind of small-scale hunting. So means here the human activities are allowed, only giving a kind of usufruct right, not the ownership right. Here, the communities are being given only usufruct right, means they can use some part of the forest, not as a right, not as a kind of ownership right. So only they can access and use the for some of the forest areas for collecting the fuel or some forest products for their personal consumption, not for the specifically for commercial purpose also. So here, in the moment we declared some area as a reserve forest, the it enjoy the high degree of protection with respect to the protected forest. So it enjoy the high degree of protection. So however, it is possible that the certain protected forest may enjoy more protection with respect to the certain reserve forest. So here the protection is highly needed. So protected forest are two kinds, which I already uh, told you. So that means here. So next level of conservation and protection is mostly we go for either we declared some area as a national park or some area we declared kind of bird sanctuary or some kind animal area we can declare. If the elephants are more in that area, we can declare some area as an elephant sanctuary, some area as a bird sanctuary. Then depends upon some area where the tigers are also staying, we declare it as also tiger reserve. So means the question is uh, declaring all these areas in the name of reserve forest, national park, wildlife sanctuary and all. The main intention is how we can increase the degree of protection of those animals and plants. So that is the main intention, how we can increase the degree of protection. Then if you look at the national park, which is very, because you all have heard the name of the various national park. Okay. So, and then what exactly that national park is? A national park exactly is an area owned by the state governments. So mostly the state government own these national parks. What they do? So, and dedicated for the conservation of the scenery and the natural and historic object of national significance. In the national park, what exactly happened? The government, they mostly declared as an area, as a forest area, as a national park, basically to show their complete dedication for the conservation of scenery and the natural and historic objects in the which are having lots of national significance. So, and also to conserve the wild animals and plants. By such means, they try to kind of unimpede for the employment of present and future generations. So, like the activities such as grazing, forestry, cultivation, these all activities are strictly prohibited and these are all not allowed in the national park. Even in this national park, they never allowed even to get into the forest for collecting the forest products also. All these forest products, either the forest department collect, they sell it out, but they never allow the people's free movement for collection of all these forest products. So only the forest department can engage the people for collecting those products only. Otherwise, because it is in the control of completely in the forest department, the public cannot get into this area without the permission of the, because generally whenever we used to visit some national park, because we have Kaziranga National Park, so many national, we have Vitarkanya National Park now. Whenever we visited any national park, so all this national park we visit with the permission of the forest department, which falls under the ecotourism sites. So it is not that you can have an open entry to the any national park where you can, even the local communities also not having any open entry to any national parks. So these are mostly for the protection of some significant monuments, some significant natural beauties, natural sceneries, wildlife, and very so this is exactly the main intention of declaring a forest as a national park. Then sometimes we declare some areas in wildlife sanctuary also. What is exactly the main thrust of declaring a forest as a wildlife sanctuary? Because sometimes what happened, we found there are some particular forest area where some wildlife, some of the wildlife are living, which are in the process of extinction, and which numbers are very limited, and there is a high chance that unless and until we provide some special attention to those animals, and they may disappear, they may extinct from this earth. So that's why we declare some of the forest area as a wildlife sanctuary. It is an areas generally specifically designated where the mostly what we do whenever we found that there are certain kind of forest where the some animals are residing which are very kind of rare animals, and then the government feels that there is a certain kind of poaching activities happening, hunting and poaching, some illegal entries happening. So illegal interference is happening in those areas, then they immediately government declared those areas in wildlife sanctuary. So uh, here what happened? Uh, the because some of the wildlife sanctuaries also you found there's lots of streams are there, rivers are also there inside the wildlife sanctuary. Here the all kind of activities also again prohibited like national park. Here the government makes a complete prohibition of fishing, grazing, and any kind of hunting, shooting. All these kind of activities are completely prohibited so that it can give more degree of protection to those animals who are those wildlife, actual wild animals, have more degree of protection. And sometimes we declare some area simply sanctuary. So then later on we tell it is a bird sanctuary or elephant sanctuary, or we tell whatever in the name of deer sanctuary, whatever we gave the name in the different point of time, we define those sanctuaries differently. So see sanctuary specifically, if you look at the definition of sanctuary, sanctuary exactly is an area where killing and hunting of animals are completely prohibited, except under certain kind of orders where the authorities give certain kind of order. These small kind of activities sometimes they allow inside the sanctuary because there are certain kind of peoples who are living inside the sanctuary area since long back, since generations, and sometimes whenever they defining a forest as a sanctuary, they remove those local communities in the form of displacement. So they also need certain kind of support, otherwise they cannot survive. So they provide protection and optimum living condition who means uh, to the main thrust of declaring as an area as a kind of sanctuary is providing an optimum living condition to these wild animals. Only animals are conserved, could be private property also because and also outside activities also prohibited. So means here the degree of protection is again more kind of stringent. And sometimes you see we declared some areas in a biosphere reserve, which is a very stringent concept. Biosphere, it is generally used for multi-purpose activities and also multi-purpose protected areas. So means we protect one area, not mostly for conserving, suppose either for monuments or conserving animals. But if you look at the biosphere, the purpose is very wider and very different also. Because here there are we are protecting one area with a different purpose. Here we want for more protection, all plants and animals are preserved and conserved within in their natural habitat only. That means here in the biosphere, both the flora and fauna are well protected. Means we are not only concerned about a specific animal, specific monuments, specific plants. Rather, we are all concerned about protecting the natural habitat of all animals and also all plants and monuments, everything. Because when our main intention is protection of the natural habitats, then we will not disturb anything, neither because these plants, the caves, all these things should be well protected, which can gives a complete, even the bushes also. So all these things are well managed and well protected, which will give a kind of protection to the entire kind of wildlife and plants, both the flora and fauna will be protected. We in this biosphere also sometimes we do lots of research in the sense of ecological conservation and environmental preservation. Our main intention is how we can do mostly ecological conservation and environmental preservation. So our aim is to provide these facilities for the education and awareness program. In the biosphere, what exactly happened? When I declared an area as in biosphere, we expect lots of research should be happened there. Lots of peoples, the educated people should come, do research, and then we use the education purpose, because when the plants are being protected, lots of Ayurvedic research can be held there, lots of conservation of plants should be there, so that medical science research can be also conducted there. Then once the lots of animals will be protected there, the life science people and all can be those animals can be used for their permission, with the permission of the government, can be used for the research purpose and all, because their breeding and all these things can be they can be more involved in this. Then another concept of use called tiger reserve also. See, where because the tigers numbers are decreasing day by day, and sometimes in order to make the things in a more stringent and to provide more kind of protection to the tiger, we sometimes declared as an area as a tiger reserve, where the degree of protection can be given more to the tigers for their smooth survival and smooth actions. So then these are the very, very basic concepts generally we use in the context of forest. So then another two concepts is there, which you also know that, because generally what happen whenever we tell that because age now we'll discuss about the different kind of resource management. So here you should know that what exactly the policy, what is act, what is the regulations and all. So can anybody tell me what is exactly act? Act. What is act? Hmm? Hello. What is act? Anybody?
Sir, it is
Hmm. Sorry.
done to
Done to
like take some
take some
action
action. Hmm?
in a
In a
legal
in a
way to
legal way
take
to take
action. It
action. It's
drafted.
drastic. And legal way to take action. Hmm?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. What is that legal way? Hmm? Anybody? Hmm? Because this is very, very basic question, because now you are a PG student, postgraduate student, you should know what is exactly the act and all. So anyway, please remember and try to understand when a used to be passed by both the houses, whether it is in the in the state assembly or in the parliament, both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, it is being passed, and then get the consent of president, then it becomes an act. When a bill is being passed by both the houses, whether it is state level or at the central levels, and if in the state there is no Vidhan Parishad, so it has to be passed in the Vidhan Sabha, then get it signed by the governor of the rest of that respective state, and if also, so in the context of uh, uh, central level, it should be passed both by Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, then has to be get the consent of president, then it will enact. So what is ordinance? Anybody, what is ordinance? Hmm? What is ordinance? Hmm?
Sir,
Hmm.
any authoritative order?
Hmm?
Any authoritative order, sir?
Any?
Any order which is given by authorities in state
Sir, religious, right?
I'm telling about ordinance.
It can be considered as logical.
Uh, hmm? See, generally, let me first tell you about the how a bill becomes an act also. See, generally what will happen when sometimes it may be a private bill, sometimes the government bring a bill also. So it is generally it comes in a first in a kind of in a proposal mode, and there are various stages has to be crossed to a bill to be passed in the parliament and to become an act. First, somebody has to uh, introduce this bill in the parliament. Firstly, in the mostly the in the lower house it should be introduced. Then what happened? Then a question will be raised, and some motion can be raised in the parliament and mostly in the lower house. If sometimes also a vote can be organized, so then what will happen? The government will publish it in a gazette mode. It is not that immediately they can come and pass it. So what happened? Then they will publish it in the gazette form. So in the official gazette. So means, and while somebody has to introduce this bill in the parliament, whether it is some MP can bring it a private bill, or sometimes the ruling party bring a bill also. It needs the permission from the speaker. So here, then once some debate is held, then some confusion is if they arise. Also, sometimes they can refer this bill to the standing committee also. Parliamentary standing committee, different standing committees are. So the committee will consider the general principle and clause of the bills, then they will give their comments, and again they can go for a second readings in the parliament. So then again the bill is being discussed. Then once the bill is being also uh, passed in Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, wherever in one house, then it can be introduced in the other houses. So then money bill is also something different. They used to be passed in different way. Then sometimes what happens? They sometimes you'll find that suppose now if you look into suppose the present government is having huge majority in the Lok Sabha, they don't have less majority, they don't have majority in the Rajya Sabha. Very soon they may get the majority in the Rajya Sabha also. So then what they can do? So they, if they feel that they have majority, if they call the joint parliamentary meeting, so then what they can do? They can call a joint meeting of both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and in that joint meeting they can pass the bill. Suppose some bill is always passed in the Lok Sabha and it could not able to pass in the Rajya Sabha. If the ruling party will feel that if combinedly they have the majority, then they can call the joint parliamentary committee, joint parliament meeting, and they can pass it. So, and then once uh, so you see, and if you look into, there are certain kind of bills. Suppose a constitutional amendment bills. In that constitutional amendment bills, you cannot call a joint parliamentary committee meeting. But that is also because if constitutional amendment, it needs a 2/3 majority and it should be called separately, either separately in the Rajya Sabha and separately in Lok Sabha. But it is not that if a government is having a huge majority in the Lok Sabha, the government can do whatever they want. No, constitutional amendment cannot be called in a joint parliamentary committee meeting. It should be in a separate meeting. So then once the bill is being passed, that should get the assent of the president. So, but the ordinance, when parliament is not in function, when parliament is not in function, if the government wants a kind of act to be passed immediately, and in near future, suppose the Lok Sabha parliament is not going to sit, then what they do, they used to brought in ordinance if it is urgency is there. So then within this next 6 months, that ordinance, that act has to be passed in the parliament, otherwise it will be nullified. So that's why the most of the time the government, suppose if you look into your this land acquisition act came 4 times, the ordinance came, and later on then it could not pass in the parliament and it was rejected. So there is also limit, because every time you cannot bring in the ordinance form. So like your this uh, uh, that tin talaq bill, that was also brought past in the ordinance mode, then and later on it was passed in the parliament. So these are the acts and kind of ordinance. In the next class, we'll discuss about the forest governance, and that time we'll discuss about what are the other regulations and all these things in the constitutional mode. So we'll meet in the next week. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.